Hey everybody, this is Kaga, and I just wanted to make a quick video about the add-on TellMeWhen. So TellMeWhen is an add-on that allows you to track very basic things in World of Warcraft. It's often compared to weak auras, and weak auras are of course very popular and they're very powerful, but they're also somewhat complex. And so what I like about TellMeWhen is that it's a very good alternative or supplement for weak auras, because they're just a little bit more friendly to the average player. So to start, of course, you download the add-on, and then you can type /tmw, which of course stands for TellMeWhen. Now you already see I will have some stuff, but if you just have this add-on brand new, you'll just have 4 empty bars or 4 empty slots and this purple hand. Now this purple hand is just the anchor. It helps you, like if there's no bars visible, it helps you interact with the add-on, because otherwise you wouldn't have anything. But just to start it up, you can right click on the empty bars that you would normally see here. So I'm just going to go to groups. I'm quickly going to hide these, hide this one, disable this one, and I will disable this one. Alright, so now it's going to tell me like, oh, you have nothing to click. So I'm popping up this message so I can open the menu like this. I'm just going to make a new profile. So this is what you can do yourself, right? You'll go into this menu and you'll see right here, you'll see this on your own screen. And you can just right click any of this, and then you go to this menu. So just to start a group, well, we already have a group. It tells you right here, it's the one with no name. So I'm just going to name this new profile, just for fun. Then you can select like, all right, do I want icons? Do I want a bar? You know, maybe tracking something that is fills up like a bar, or just icons. Now, something I almost always enable is this one, show only in combat. This just means that the aspects of the add-on will disappear when the combat is over. And if you have multiple profiles that you want to manage, you can kind of like specify like, oh, I want this only in holy, and I only want this when I'm healing, right? You don't actually have to do both of them, but you know. Then there's a bunch of other stuff, like you can have textures, you can say like how many rows is this going to be, right? You can see it scales up very hard. How many icons do I want to have? Do I only want to have 2 icons maybe 3, maybe 4. Right, and don't forget to give it a name, because that way you'll be able to recognize it in the menu. If you do a bar instead, you get this. It starts out with 4 bars, which is kind of silly, so we put columns to 1, and now we only have 1 bar. And then you see it still has an icon, and this is to tell you, you know, maybe what you're tracking. If you want this to be gone, you can just deselect show icon, and then it just becomes an entire bar. But we'll get into that later. For now, I'm just going to go back to icon, and I'm going to say I want 4 icons. So what does TellMeWhen actually do? Well, it's a very easy, configurable way to track all kinds of tiny little things that you might want to track. So for example, let's start with something easy. Let's just say I would like to track the cooldown of Prayer of Mending, right? Prayer of Mending, important ability. When I cast it, it goes on cooldown, and I want to cast it every time it's available. So, you know, I could just cast it, I could just track it here if I want to, but I can also say, oh, I want it to be more in my field of vision, or I want it to be somewhere else. So then you right click the icon, the empty icon, and then you can select here in icon type, and these are, oh, sorry, these are all kinds of different options you have. You can track all kinds of stuff here. So the one we're going to start with is spell cooldown, right? So we click this, and then we have a bunch of options. So spell cooldown is pretty easy, because there's not, you know, there's not a lot to it. You just track the cooldown, that's it. So it asks you, what do you want to track? In this case, I'm going to type Prayer of Mending, and you'll see as I type, it narrows down the list. Now you will see usually a lot of entries that are kind of gibberish, just because these are like, you know, maybe legacy spells that are still in the game files, or maybe there are abilities from mobs. But usually these colored ones are stuff that, you know, we care about, and then you just kind of want to see like, all right, which is the most complete tooltip, right? So at the top we see it's the priest icon, priest ability. It actually has the cooldown. This one doesn't, right? So I don't really have a clue which one this is, but it's a different spell ID. I think if you really can't find what you're looking for, and you really want to track it down, you can probably get the spell ID off of Wowhead, right? So that's a contingency plan. But we found it, Prayer of Mending. There you go. Well, then I can also select like, okay, do I want to check for range? Like, is my target in range? Do I want to check for power? Do I have enough mana to cast it? And don't ignore GCD. So that's basically like, is it going to show the GCD as I use it? I'm going to leave all of these off for now. It's going to be fine. And then it gives me 2 options for opacity, right? So when the spell is ready to be casted, I want it to be at, let's say, 65%. And when the spell is not ready to be cast, I want it to be at 25%. So let's just, take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to disable the editing menu. Well, I need to be in combat. Actually, let me turn that off because that would probably be better for the demonstration. There we go. All right. So now it's always showing, right? So just pretend we're in combat. So now when I cast it, see it gets darker. And then when it comes off cooldown, you'll see it gets lighter again. Just going to be the tedious thing and wait out this cooldown. And there you go, lights back up again. Now, of course, maybe it's more useful if we actually have some numbers to show us. So we have the show timer, which is that it grays out and then it slowly comes back up. So we want to show timer, and we also want to show timer text. So now this will look more like what you have on your hotbars, where I press it, and see now it starts counting down. Same as what you have right here. So we're already pretty successful with this one, right? And then you can also just say like rescale it, like maybe it's really important that I cast this off cooldown, so I'm going to have this super huge in my screen, so that way I can always keep track of it when I need to, right? But yeah, you can mess around with that as you want. So that's tracking cooldown. Cooldown's pretty easy. Now there is some other options here. I'm not the full expert of TellMeWhen myself, because I use it for very minimal things. But there's definitely some powerful tools that you can use with this. You can also set minimum and maximum duration. So this is, for example, let's say you have something that has like 40-second cooldown, and you only want it to tell you something if it's like within the last 10 seconds, right? Because very often you have these cooldowns that you don't care if it's a minute away, right? You start caring when it's like within 10 seconds, because then you might have to make decisions, right? That's stuff you can fix with these. And also stack requirements, other stuff you can mess with. Then you have the allow global cooldown or don't ignore GCD. This is basically when I start casting this, see it becomes, guess I'll drag it up a little bit. See, it becomes unavailable when I'm GCDing, because that's kind of the same with it's the same thing as a cooldown, right? So if I check this option as well, it's a little bit hard to see because the opacity is really low. So let me just get that up a little bit. All right, let's drag that one up. See, now you see it's actually tracking the GCD same as on the hotbars, right? Now I personally find that annoying, so I basically never use that. But it's there if you want it. Alright, so that's spell cooldown. Pretty easy, right? Let's move on to something a little bit more interesting. So let's say I'm a class that has a debuff, right? I have Shadow Word Pain, and I want to be tracking that on my target. So let's make a new one. We go right click on the empty square, get this new option again, and this time I'm going to say a buff or a debuff. So now we get a bunch of different options. So first, what are we going to track? We're going to track Shadow Word Pain. Now we get all these options, and I see again, this one is the most complete. It's always at the top. Shadow Word Pain, there we go. Important, who do we watch? Well, obviously it's not going to be on me, because I don't cast it on myself. Instead, we're going to be choosing the target. You can have all kinds of stuff, like target of target, or your focus, or whatever, right? Party member number 1, number 2, stuff like that. You can experiment and see what's up. But for now, we just need a target. So we're not tracking a buff, we're tracking a debuff. Now I want to only be tracking the one that I have casted, because if there's a second priest, I don't need to know his Shadow Word Pain. So only by me. Well, these are some other options that I don't really use. So if it's up on the target, I always have the same, 65%. And if it's not on the target, I'm not going to track it, because that tells me that it's not on the target. Then as always, I'm going to show timer and show the timer text. And then here's a bunch of other other stuff, right? Like when it's in certain durations, like if you have a buff that lasts a minute, maybe you don't want to be reminded that it's there. and you would rather get a notification when it's below 10 seconds, for example, right? That's stuff you can manage with these things. But for now, this is all we need to do. So now I'm turning it off again. And now if I apply shadow word paint to my target, you see I get nice little bit of feedback on how long it's going to take, right? And this might be more intuitive than whatever you see right here. And especially for dot classes where the dot is a large part of your damage or generates resources for you, it's really nice to just kind of cluster your dots, cluster the stuff that you apply to enemies into a little batch, and you can put it anywhere on the screen where you can easily find it back. I usually have it, kind of centered around here, very close to my cast bar usually. And so this is a very nice way, right? I can also apply a second dot. Well, Holy Fire I won't really need to track, but if you're a class that has multiple dots, then it's definitely a good thing to keep track of their durations. Alright. What more do we have? Well, we also have buffs. So you can track buffs in different kind of ways. You can of course track if you have a buff, and then it shows you when you have a buff and how long that buff is going to last, right? Now, that's really useful for procs, for example. Now, Priest doesn't really have too many interesting procs. I have one proc, which is already kind of... The feedback for that is also pretty good already. Let's see if I can trigger it here. There we go, Surge of Light. Right, I already get this feedback from Blizzard, which is really nice. But, let's say you are a class and you have a proc that isn't as visible, so maybe Sudden Death from Warriors. Right, maybe that's not as visible. So what I can do is go who to track. I'm going to track player. Oh, sorry, that is what to track. Sorry, that is Surge of Light. There it is, Surge of Light. Who to track is me. It's a buff. It's only cast by me. So if it's present, I'm going to have 65%. I'm going to have the timer and the timer text. And when it's absent, I'm not going to track it. Right, so again, this is pretty easy. I'm just going to start healing. And hopefully it's going to trigger pretty soon. There we go. And it's going to tell me I have 1 stack, because this is actually something that stacks up to 2 times. It's going to tell me how long it's going to last, and now hopefully I get the second proc as well. There we go. So Blizzard already has put in feedback for this ability, so this is slightly pointless. But, it's a demonstration for classes that may not have this. So this is just a nice way to keep track of this. Very good way to keep track of important procs. Another thing which you can also do is missing debuffs, or missing buffs or debuffs. So this is also a way, right, if your brain works in this way, you can also track which buffs or debuffs your target is missing, for example. Instead of tracking which buffs you have active, you can also track if they have debuffs missing, right? Maybe that's how you like it better. It's also really useful, for example, for raid buffs, right? So Power Word Fortitude. Am I spelling that correctly? Oh yeah, here it is. I need this one. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's an option for raid or something. There might be. I haven't looked into it. I usually just track it for myself. So only cast by me, of course. And if it's absent, it's going to be 65% for me. I won't really need these because there's no timer to it. Right, so if I dispel this for myself, right, it's going to tell me, oh, this buff is not applied. This buff is missing, right? So that reminds me, oh yeah, I need to apply it. Right, so for example, after you die, if you're doing a lot of Mythic Plus and you constantly die because you're bad at the game, you're like, oh shit, I need to apply the buff again. So those are kind of, most of the stuff that you need. There's also stuff like diminishing returns, right? Tracking if someone has their stun, if someone is stunnable or if there's diminishing returns, you can track all kinds of stuff, even swing timers. So definitely, definitely kind of experiment with this yourself. Now the last thing I want to show you regarding these things is just, I'm going to make a new group and I just want to show you the bar. So now we have a new group right here. I'm going to name it resource. And then I'm going to say it's a bar. Now we get this little weird interaction again. So I got to put it to 1 column and I don't want an icon. So now I have this neat little bar. Then I can right click it and say, okay, I want this to be my resource. And that's this one, resource display. So you can track your primary resource, or you can track other stuff that you want. For example, stagger bar, arcane charges, or your holy power. But in this case, I'm just going to track my primary resource, which is mana. And then you can do some stuff to it, right? You can kind of drag in all kinds of directions. And then you might see like, oh, this text is kind of ugly, which, I think this way of tracking, this is a lot of text that doesn't need to be there, right? So I generally go for something like center number. So now you only have one number. And then you can see this formula here, and you can actually say like, all right, this percentage doesn't matter because I don't want to track my percentage mana. I might want to track my actual mana, right? That's all up to you. For example, for mana, percentage is maybe useful. Maybe you don't want to track it. But for something like rage or for energy, it might actually be pretty important to track the exact number, right? Because you understand like, oh, to cast this ability, I need 30 energy, right? And then I don't care if it's a percentage. I want it to be the exact number, right? So in that case, you can just go in here, and you can kind of start to take all of this stuff away, and just type value and then square bracket, I think it is. Yeah, there you go, square bracket. So that's all you need to do to just get the exact number, right? So that might be really important for your rage or stuff. And then it's just, I need to remember how to do the the custom texture, because I know there was a way to get a different texture on here, but now I kind of blank on how that was done. I know you can do stuff like this, and then there was a way to get it into a different color. Well, it doesn't matter, I guess. There's a way to get it into different colors as well. I can't quite remember how to do that, but hey, you can always Google that a little bit. Oh, I think it's actually here. It might be here. But yeah, this is how you can track mana and rage and stuff. So the last thing I want to do here is just to look at some other options, not for how to code this, but more like what the add-on allows you. So you can see here, it has options for right clicking, but also for dragging spells, right? So if you, what is it? Yeah, you can right click and drag. Then you can drag over something else, and then you can say something like swap here, or I can say copy here, right? So these are kind of, in case you want to change positioning, these are useful things. You can just drag it over and then say, oh, I want to swap it here. I want to, do all kinds of other stuff. And lastly, how to get rid of these is just to go to the profile that you need. So for example, this resource bar, you scroll down, and then it says here, delete group, right? And that's how you delete the group. Right click this one, go down, delete group, and then it's gone. So now I can get these ones back. I can enable this one and enable this one. So this is just my mana bar. I have chosen to have it, oh, here it is. Use class color. There you go. Override color group and then use class colors. There you go. That's what I did. This is just my mana bar, and this is just tracking different buffs, right? So if I just go into combat, I can track if my power infusion is off cooldown. I can track how my my holy words are doing, and I have one for power infusion. And then you can also see my mana bar slowly going down as I cast spells. So that was just a very quick introduction to TellMeWhen. I hope you can use this to kind of improve the visibility of your class mechanics. And if you have any questions, be sure to reach out to me. Thank you very much for watching, and good luck out there.